Hi everyone, I'm Thomas Jeng, venture partner at Headline Asia, and I'm pleased to be bringing you 5 frameworks to help guide your growth. To introduce myself, I've spent a fair bit of time across different industries. I've been a go-to-market leader 3 times across professional services, edtech, and now fintech as well, leading sales, marketing, partnerships, all sorts of different functions within this broad category of bringing products to market. I'm also now a venture investor, as I mentioned, with Headline Asia, which is a VC firm investing globally. I'm part of the Asia arm, which focuses on Japan, Taiwan, as well as Southeast Asia. In addition to these roles, I'm also frequently a mentor and advisor to startup founders throughout the region. I also had the experience of founding a digital talent platform myself. And so the act of going 0 to 1 and trying to create something from nothing is one that's familiar to me and has a strong place in my heart. So for our first framework, what I want to talk about is the 6 fits. Oftentimes in the startup ecosystem, we talk about product market fit. And it's very true that this is in some ways a holy grail for companies that are going 0 to 1. After all, if you don't have a product that the market wants, you have no business whatsoever. What we talk less about is about the other fits that are required to actually scale your business, especially once you've gone from 0 to 1 on product market fit. First, credit where credit is due. This framework is inspired by Brian Balfour's 4 Fits framework. And Brian Balfour, of course, is the former head of growth, or the former VP of growth at HubSpot, and now the founder and CEO of Reforge. I really admire the work, and I recommend it to anyone who's looking at product management and growth generally. I've increased the number of fits to talk about here by 2 as part of my own experience. The first thing that I always start with is market. Who is, in fact, the customer? What is their profile? And what are their needs? What is the context that they sit in terms of the competitive environment and the policy and regulatory context, especially in industries like education, fintech, and so on? Once we have a strong understanding of the customer and what they need, we can look at the product. In other words, what is the actual offering? What is the solution we're bringing to those customers? And we want to make sure that there is consistency between their needs, the pain points that they face, and the key features, the painkillers, and what Brian has called the gain creators on the product side. In other words, what are we actually doing for the customer that solves their needs in a way that's different than the other offerings and solutions that are already on the market? And we'll talk more about how to make sure you have a coherent value proposition later, but this in some ways is the core and the foundation of everything else. If you do not have the fit between market and product, you do not have a business at all. It's not really possible to have a consistently scaling business without a product that you're actually bringing to a market that exists. As you introduce product, you of course need to look at your distribution channels. And we can look at channels more broadly. Really, this is any way you're trying to reach the customer. And every channel could be for anything from email to WhatsApp, to TV, to a billboard. It's really any way we can have an interaction with the customer. And it could even be channels or means that are outside of our direct control influence, like word of mouth. And for every channel, we want to be looking at things like interaction quality. How are we actually interacting with the customer? What is the information we're conveying to each other? What is the sense of expertise? What is the sense of quality that we are able to bring to the customer through these interactions? And fourth, of course, is monetization. It wouldn't be a business if we weren't trying to make money. At the end of the day, we do need to look at how we're charging customers, how we're pricing, and what sort of terms we're offering. And each of these things, of course, each of these 4 elements, again, could be a whole deep dive by itself. What we should really be keeping in mind is that each of these elements needs to fit with the others. Your distribution channel should also be bringing your product to market in the best light possible. Some channels are just a better fit for some types of products. For example, if you're selling an embedded finance product that's highly reliant on APIs, it's unlikely in most circumstances that something like a billboard will be successful. You essentially need to set up something more like enterprise sales, where you have deep, repeated, and very robust discussions with the customer as they're trying to figure out how to implement and how to use your product effectively. This is what I mean by interaction quality, where you actually need to make sure you are meeting the customer where they are and helping them make progress towards their end objectives through a combination of the channel as well as product. And of course, your monetization needs to fit with the market. You can't be pricing yourself out of the market. You can't be pricing yourself too low in the market. And the way you price and the way you charge needs to be consistent with the quality of the product. And of course, your distribution channels themselves need to be consistent with your monetization when it comes to cost as well. You can't be doing enterprise sales for a $5 popsicle on the street. It's just not going to happen. You will not make enough money to offset the cost of your sales force, for instance. And so you should only deploy this in very specific situations. Do keep in mind as we go forward, as we talk about the other frameworks today, that you need to have a fit and concordance between each of these different frameworks. So some of you will be familiar with the elements in this framework, which is a modified version of the value proposition canvas, which you can find on the internet. And I've modified it slightly in my own coaching and my own advisory work to make it a bit more digestible for founders who are looking for a simple and straightforward way to communicate their value to the market. But there's also another way to really express the market and product fit. As you can see, the 5 boxes on the left, the customer profile, the jobs to be done, the current alternatives, the pain points and gain points are essentially what's represented by the current market. What the customer wants, who they are, as well as what they're currently using. Inevitably, unless they already have a perfect solution, whatever they're using will give rise to pain points as well as gain points. Pain points being the things that are causing them pain, of course, that are leading to friction, that are making it difficult to do their job and accomplish what they've set out to do. Gain points being the gaps in capabilities that the customer might desire, but they are not getting in their current set of offerings. These are things that will make them stronger. Oftentimes, the customer or the user will be more motivated by solving their pain points than their relative gain points. Once we have a grasp of who the customer is, what they're trying to accomplish, what they're using, and the various pain points and gain points that are associated, we can start to construct in our mind what would be the major selling points of our own solution. What are the pain points that we can match to our painkillers? And what are the gain points that we can match to the vitamins or the gain creators that we might be offering to the market? The combination of those painkillers and vitamins in the context of the customer's needs is what gives rise to distinctive value. For instance, in my work in edtech previously, we were working with trainers, we were working with consultants who were trying to create very premium experiences. And without naming any names, the alternatives on the market for a learning management system or for a content delivery system tended to be very video-based. It was essentially akin to a Coursera, where you would record a video, you would have the audience or the students watch the video, and then answer a set of quizzes. And that was fine if you're essentially trying to deliver a set of lectures and you're trying to democratize learning. It's a very easy thing to do. But in the case of our customers, they were trying to create a very premium experience. They themselves were schooled in the latest pedagogical methods and wanted to express a more interactive experience. And in their context, this lack of interaction on the more traditional learning management system platforms actually created pain for them. It also meant that they were not able to bring to their higher end clients the premium experience that they were really trying to provide. And so in our platform, we're able to create both a mobile-friendly version that did not require as much video creation, which reduced the total cost and resources required to bring a course to market, while also allowing for much greater interaction and many more modes of interaction between the delivery and the student or the learner themselves. And so from the client standpoint, from the customer standpoint, they were able to convey the full value of what they were doing, and therefore they were able to bring the whole selves and everything that they knew with this platform that augmented their greatest strengths, which is our selling point in the market. For our next framework, I want to talk about what we do once we've gotten to initial product market fit. It's generally inevitable that your initial area of PMF will have a relatively small, limited surface area when it comes to commercial opportunity. And that's what's represented on the lower left-hand side of this chart here. We have two axes. One is requirements difference, which is the difference between subsequent opportunities and where you have found initial product market fit, and distribution difference on the vertical axis, which is how much additional work or how much retooling we need to do in terms of distribution versus where we found initial product market fit. The size of the circles on this chart represents the relative size of the opportunity. And we can express that in different ways, whether it's gross profit, net profit, revenue, and so on. There's different ways to think about this. But conceptually, one mental model that we should have in mind is that each subsequent opportunity will require additional work for us to capture. it is usually not enough to stay with your initial product market fit if you're trying to create a sizable business. For each additional opportunity in the market, you will need a refined product market fit and also refined channel market fit. And so as you're evaluating each additional opportunity, what you want to do is make sure that you have a good grasp of the difference in the requirements of the customer faces, as well as what it will take to get to them, and then the overall payoff that you'll receive if you do successfully find product market fit and channel market fit again. One mistake I often find executives and founders make is that they conflate, or in other words, they mix up their initial product market fit with saying that, oh, it worked in one market, then it will work in the next one. In my experience, that has never been the case. And particularly as you're coming out to APAC, and even more specifically Southeast Asia, every market is humongously different, right? I mean, just within Southeast Asia. And so it's inevitable you will have differences in customer behavior and in what they need. And so as you're breaking it down and as you're assessing where you want your company to go, you should keep in mind, as you're trying to jump between bubbles, the overall return, or the ROI you're going to get from each one. And you should carefully assess what is the difference in customer requirements and the difference in distribution, what it will ultimately get for you. You should not try to cover the entire canvas at the same time. Your teams will die and you will fail in the market. Don't do that. We just talked about the difference in customer requirements in the last framework. One thing that we talk very infrequently about in the ecosystem today is how you select different channels. And this can often become overwhelming for founders that are trying to enter a new market. Or you hire a marketing leader or something like that. They'll basically tell you whatever channels they're most familiar with are the right channels to use for a given situation. And it makes sense, right? Because they themselves trade on their playbook and their familiarity with a given function. They know how to run sales, they know how to run marketing. Anytime we're trying to get into a new segment or a new opportunity, we do need a refined channel market fit as well. And we need to make sure those channels are consistent with the experience of the product, as well as with the monetization model that we have. So there's no easy way to do this. There are also millions of potential channels that you could be using. And so it does become quite overwhelming and overly complex when we're trying to select from all the potential channels. But overall, I think a useful set of criteria, a useful framework that I keep in my mind whenever I'm entering a new market or trying to think about a new thing is to select channels based on 3 different qualities. The first is reach. How much of an audience and who are you going to reach with a given channel? The second is interaction quality. What is the quality of the information? What is going to be the level of interaction between the customer and you? What is the overall sorts of experience they're conveying as they interact with you as a company? Ultimately, to some extent, that channel, whether it's a human or a billboard or an advertisement on Twitter or whatever, is going to convey something about your company. It is going to represent your company and your product. And in a very real way, that channel is part of the overall solution that you're bringing to the customer. And you want to make sure that the type of interaction, type of experience the customer has when they're working with you through that channel is consistent with what you're trying to convey. And third, of course, is cost. How much are you paying to tap into this channel? How much are you getting out of that channel for what you're putting into it, particularly when it comes to the monetization and to the product as well. Okay, so we've come a long way on our journey so far. Now with this framework, we're getting down to the execution level, where we have to be very clear about what we're doing at each stage in a given market. We are aligning resources. The first one is explore. The first thing that we should do is make sure that our theoretical assessment of the opportunity is correct, that we have validated the demand, we validated the requirements of the customer in the market. The second is inevitably, as we're entering a new market, we will need to develop differentiated product capabilities, and this is what I'm referring to as build. Going back to the value proposition framework, if we have not built a thing that is different, if we have not built a solution that is actually going to be useful for the customer, they're not going to use it. There's no reason for them to switch to something new if it's not going to do anything for them. Once you've actually built out the solution, you can try to go to market with it and mine for revenue. And this is a repeated activity. It's one that you want to make sure is replicable and repeatable over time. This is what actually creates a scale. This is how you generate and capture demand in the market. And fourth, as you mine, and as you start to find those revenue streams, you will see that there are opportunities for refinement. You'll receive customer feedback, your teams will give you feedback on what could be sold or differently or what you could bring to market, and so you end up iterating on the product as well as your monetization approach. Again, where I see teams stumble is where they mix up all four of these different stages. Sometimes I've seen teams put an entire go-to-market team in market. You've got the head of sales and partnerships and marketing and customer success, even before you've even built the product. This is expensive and doesn't work. Conversely, I've also seen very product-focused founders just continue to build. And they just keep building and building and building without actually having explored beforehand, without actually having understood what customers want, and therefore sort of stumbling because they haven't brought anything useful to market. And so as you're going into a new market and as you're trying to scale, you have to be absolutely certain that you have taken each of these four steps. It's possible to stumble into an opportunity. There is always the role of potential serendipity in market expansion. But generally speaking, if you're trying to go about it in a coherent way and trying to maintain integrity, you want to make sure that you have accounted for all four of these stages. If there's anything that you take away from our conversation today, it is that go-to-market, market scaling, is complicated. There's a lot of things going on, but it is achievable. And particularly as you break down your analysis and then your execution based on these frameworks, and as you account for each element, you're much more likely to be successful. I know that our discussion so far has been a little bit conceptual. It's been a bit more abstract and focused on the frameworks. I'm looking forward to discussing these examples, potential examples in greater detail, and how to implement these frameworks in the fireside chat later.